What's up, everybody? In today's video, we're going to be discussing the top players to watch at the NFL Combine. These guys and how they test is going to be incredibly important for their draft capital. If some of these guys test very highly, it could definitely improve their draft stock. But if disaster strikes, they could potentially see their draft stock reduced significantly.
Kicking it off at our number 5 spot, we do have only 5 players to showcase today. There's a few that just barely missed the mark that we'll go over at the end of the video. But at our number 5 spot, we're going with Ollie Gordon II here. So I think he's probably going to be in that 4.6 range. I don't necessarily think he's very agile as well, but I'm hearing some rumors he could be in that 4.4 to low 4.5 range too. And obviously he's getting some hype on Twitter, right, with some of his agility things, what he's doing on his own, right? So we're seeing some highlights there. So if he actually performs relatively well, I think he's going to be a day 3 guy, but he could slip into day 2 absolutely if he performs well in these agility drills, and specifically the 40 time. I think his 40 time's really going to make or break him for sure. And as far as his strength's concerned, if he does do the bench press, I think he's a relatively strong back. He's one of the biggest backs in the class as well, so I would be surprised if he didn't perform well there.
Yeah, and obviously you somewhat want to follow the draft capital, right? Now, that doesn't mean if somebody that you think is a terrible prospect gets selected in the first round that you necessarily want to take them before players that you think are definitely talented that also receive decent draft capital. But even if some of these combine scores, specifically the agility drills, he scores well on them. At least from what we've seen, right? I don't think that translates to the NFL field while he's running the football. So, but definitely, nonetheless, if he performs well, he could definitely see his draft stock rise.
For sure. And some of these franchises are really, really invested into these scores at the combine, like your 20-yard shuttles and your 3-cone drills. Those drills especially, they have all sorts of metrics and formulas that go into drafting their players as well. So, I'd like these teams to be more so focused on the tape, but, some of these teams are super invested in the numbers. So moving on to the number 4 spot.
So at number 4, we have Tez Johnson. So we actually have official measurements for him. He's a little bit north of 5'9", but still under 5'10". And I believe he was 156 pounds, 155, right around there, which we honestly haven't really seen somebody this size succeed at the NFL level. Now, if you watch the film or even just some highlights, you can see that this guy is absolutely dynamic with the football in his hands. I think in the agility drills, that is something that's going to be quite important for him, but I do think he's going to perform very, very well there. You see it, he definitely on the field has very good change of direction, agility, good spatial awareness, and also a relatively decent burner speed as well. So I do think that the combine is going to be favorable to him in the sense of how he performs in the drills themselves. But it will be interesting to see what he weighs in at the combine, and then what NFL teams think about him.
And with his weight, I think he's going to try to bulk up a little bit because that is a big narrative for him, right? The biggest knock on him for a lot of these scouts and a lot of these GMs is he is 156 pounds, which is, the NFL is more so, comfortable. They're more comfortable now than they have maybe 10 years ago with, these lighter framed guys just because you can be creative with them. But this is on the extreme side for undersized for sure. So I'd like to see him kind of weigh in at 165. I don't think he gets up to 170 pounds by no means, but I'm sure he's trying to bulk up and get as much weight on him as he can so he can come to the combine. I'd like to see him at that 165 range for sure. But like you said, I think his agility drills specifically are going to be out of this world, and his 40 time as well should be in that low 4.3 range. Now, for whatever reason, if he underperforms in this, he could tank to a 3rd or a 4th round pick, in my opinion. Now, moving on to number 3, we have a guy that we're not particularly high on compared to consensus. It's Dylan Sampson. Things that people like about Dylan Sampson is, he is kind of like a home run hitter running back, right, that has some really good speed, pretty solid in open space, We didn't really get the hype of all of the agility or anything like that. We saw the speed on film for sure, but that's about all we saw, really. We didn't think the vision was all that great, but with him, he's definitely got some things to prove. I don't know if I'm 100% invested in him as far as the narrative of him being a superstar athlete. So the combine's going to give us a lot of tells on how good of an athlete he actually is. He could underperform and he could slip out of that second round. I think he's currently going in the late second, early third, and a lot, I think, in my opinion, rides on him performing well at the combine.
For sure. And with somebody like this that isn't probably, going to be a full-time 3-down back with a lot of volume, at least for his sake, I would hope not. We saw historically that third round draft capital, the hit rate is significantly lower than second round running back hit rates. And so that in and of itself, historically at least, is something that is absolutely crucial for us investing in running backs. And with this guy, if he does get third round draft capital, for instance, or potentially later than that, and he's going in that late first, early second, somewhere even in the mid second range, I really would not be particularly high on this guy. And I do think that he would be a massive reach, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so moving on to the number 2 spot.
So at number 2, we have Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. So we did our prospect profile video, Bobby did, and he's going to be, a vertical X, most likely for the most part, as an NFL receiver. And the profile is that of a boundary receiver, which, as you've delved through the data, is typically the worst in terms of being a boundary, a versatile, or a slot-only receiver. And so that profile in and of itself isn't particularly great to begin with in terms of fantasy production, right? Now, also, a lot of the exceptions to the rule as boundary receivers are physical freaks with ridiculous athleticism. And so somebody like A.J. Brown, for instance, is a very good height and weight-adjusted athlete, as well as somebody obviously like DK Metcalf. And so some of these guys that typically are just your X wide receivers at the NFL level are super athletes and also have the size. Now with him, I think we can both agree he's probably not going to be running 4.4s and potentially not even 4.5s, but 4.5, late 4.5s, in my opinion, is probably reasonably accurate and could happen for sure. But yeah, as far as the agility drills, I think those will be very important as well because his agility is fine for somebody his size, but I don't think it's necessarily a plus.
Yeah, and he's, decent size, but he's not like super big for the X position, right? He's got good weight on him as well. I think he's in that 215-ish range, right? But yeah, on the film, we just didn't see a great athlete. We didn't see a guy that was super shifty after the catch, right? So his drills are definitely going to be telling because we think he might be one of those guys that definitely underperforms. And, I mean, he's gotten some hype of being like a late first-round guy. I don't necessarily see that by any means, but definitely in that second-round conversation for sure, just because of his insane production this year when he played. He is coming off an injury too, so the physicals will be another thing that's kind of telling for him as well. If they have some lingering physical issues with him, that could tank his draft stock as well. So with that, I mean, he's definitely going to have to show up at the combine to keep that second round grade pretty firmly, and I don't know if he's going to be able to perform to what his expectations are. So
I will say real quick,
yeah,
if we see a Quentin Johnston or Treylon Burks type of combine from this guy, I really think he is a strong avoid.
Yeah, absolutely strong avoid. Because, I mean, we saw what Quentin Johnston did. I think Trey Harris has better hands than QJ by, a significant margin. He's a great just considering that, his vertical jump will probably be very, very good. But outside of that, I don't know what else he's going to be able to score proficient in for sure. So moving on to the number 1 spot for me is Quinn Ewers out of Texas. I know he was playing banged up this year, so first thing is going to be those physicals, how he's testing there, right? Because if he has some nagging injuries, for sure, it's going to be hurting his draft stock. I know a report came out today that, Quinn Ewers said he's going to do everything in his power to perform to the best of his ability at the throwing drills, right? And I'm kind of scared because we did not like Quinn Ewers as a quarterback very much at all. So he understands his draft stock has plummeted because of his play this year. It was absolutely abysmal. As a guy that was one of the favorites for the Heisman at the beginning of the year, he really drastically underperformed this year. So he's looking at like a day 3 pick at the moment, and he's trying to get into that day 2 conversation, and he's going to have to make some crazy. He's going to have to basically be Zach Wilson from a couple years ago and just light it up in the throw-in drills to get in that day 2. He's going to have to do everything spectacularly, and if he doesn't, he's going to be a day 3 guy. I think regardless of how he tests, I'm still avoiding him because that's how bad the tape is. I know the Texas offense is not great to watch, so maybe it's just a scheme fit for him. I highly doubt it. But yeah, there's just so much not to like, and I really hope he puts on a performance so he can actually get a chance to be a starter in the NFL, but I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see that or not.
Yeah, I understand, from he's trying to bet on himself, right? As an athlete, you want to bet on yourself. I think if I was him, I might just be fine with even being able to be drafted, honestly. I like you said, we just do not see it on film. And I think if I had to bet, I would imagine that him performing here is only going to hurt his draft stock because I just do not believe in him.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. So, yeah, that was our 5, give or take 5 guys, right, that we were looking to watch at the Combine. There's definitely a few guys that I want to talk about kind of briefly. Tyler Shaw is one of them, quarterback out of Louisville. He's coming off 3 season-ending injuries, right? And he played the entirety of this season on a torn ACL. So I think he's a pretty solid player. He's definitely graded up there for us in the gradings, right? And I mean, I would be shocked if his physicals came back like solid, right? I think a lot of teams might be throwing their flyers away on him because of the physicals.
For sure, I think somebody else to watch is Jalen Royals coming off that season-ending foot injury. Like I think you've mentioned before, he potentially could have come back, but why would he risk re-injuring himself right before he could potentially be drafted? I think if he tests in terms specifically of the 40-yard dash time, sub 4.4, I think he is going to be a massive riser. If he tests in that low 4.4 range, I think he's going to generally hold his draft stock. But if he just does not look healthy and doesn't perform particularly well, specifically in the 40, I do think his draft stock could potentially plummet a little bit.
Yeah, and his agility drills are something that we're really anticipating as well. He's a super shifty athlete, right? So I think he might perform well in there. He's not a super small guy. He's 5'11", 215, right? Yeah, 210. So he's in that kind of DJ Moore kind of build. So he's not undersized, right? So we'll definitely be looking forward to that as well. Yeah, and another guy I wanted to talk about was Jalen Milroe. I think he's one of those guys that obviously has shown some really good promise, especially with his deep ball from time to time. It's very inconsistent. And then obviously his speed, he could showcase some Anthony Richardson type of agility and speed at the combine, which obviously that's always going to boost your draft stock. But I think his is definitely going to weigh more on his throwing ability because that's where pretty much all the question marks are. Like, he's been a great leader at Alabama, so I think the interviews are going to go generally pretty well. But as far as the throwing, I think that's going to be the biggest make or break for him.
For sure. And finally, somebody I think could potentially see his draft stock rise or plummet significantly is Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. So on film, he has decent size-adjusted speed. It's not, particularly poor or anything, but I do think the 40-yard dash time, but even more so the agility drills are going to be very important for him because on film, the lateral agility just quite honestly is not there. And in the prospect profile video, I mentioned that I think it's going to limit his potential route running upside at the NFL level. Not that he's a particularly poor receiver. He has solid, soft hands. And It's just, I think that is going to be very important for him. And I think that he could potentially, if he tests very, very well, could be as early as a late first round pick if the right team, like say, the Chargers are interested in him. Somebody that just needs a win now running back and they want to kind of, salt the game away, kind of like Jim Harbaugh does. But he could also, I think he'll probably most likely go in the second round. But if he tanks the combine, I do think that there's a chance he goes third round.
Yeah, yeah, and we actually have him mocked in our mock draft to the third round. So he's definitely has a scenario where he goes in that third round for sure.
And so, yeah, our top 5 players to watch at the combine were Ollie Gordon, Tez Johnson, Dylan Sampson, Trey Harris, and Quinn Ewers. And then we talked about other players like Milrow and Johnson. And so if you like what you've seen and heard so far, feel free to like and subscribe. It's a great way to support the channel, and we'd really appreciate it. Thanks.